Welcome, everybody, and welcome to everybody in the room, but also welcome to everybody online. I'm Professor Sapna Sharma. I'm a professor at York University in Toronto, Canada, and today we're having our panel on pathways to careers in environmental sustainability, from thinking about policy at local scale to policy at the global scale. So before we begin, we'd like to start with the land acknowledgements. York University recognizes that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and this territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon of Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And I wanted to take a moment to reflect on Indigenous communities and water, as well as our work at York University and in Canada, moving towards reconciliation with Indigenous communities. And that's something that's really important to us at York University, but also at the UNITAR Global Water Academy, and bridging and bringing together communities from around the world. So just to introduce you briefly about the UNITAR Global Water Academy, here is our mission, but essentially we're hoping to empower learners from all over the world. So learners in person, we have some people here at York University, some students, but also our broad international community. And we are working towards creating online courses that everybody will be able to take freely. Our first flagship course is nearing completion on SDG 6 that will be unveiling in a few months, and we encourage you to take this course. And something that's really important at York University, as well as with our broader community, is that many of our students are first generation students, and we have a lot of diversity on our campus. And something that we talk a lot about with our students is the hidden curriculum. And you can take classes, you can take certificates, you'll be getting a certificate of attendance today here as well. But to get to that next stage of finding your career path and finding where you're going to be headed to, there's many different aspects involved that are beyond what you learn in the classroom, what you learn through taking courses and learning material. And so this is one of our first sessions that we want to do to sort of demystify the career pathways and the pathways that people take, which can take many different forms and many different experiences to get to the position where they end up today. And we've assembled a great panel today to do that, and we're just going to talk a bit more about it, from someone who's still a student and working within the UN system, to people who have been graduated a few years before, to get to the position that they're at. And we're always learning, we're always growing, and we're always having new experiences, meeting new people to get to that career path that we always get to. So that's what we hope to share today in our panel, and with our online community, our in-person community, just to talk about how do we get the job that we might want to get, and working at local UN networks. So that's our goal today. And before we start, I wanted to just take a moment to thank two really important people who've really done a lot of work to get us here. So the first is Dr. Laura Newburn. She's a coordinator at York University. You received emails from her, and you'll be receiving your certificates from her as well after the evaluation component. And she's just done a fabulous job bringing us all here together and just making this event possible, as well as other events. So thank you, Laura, for all of your work here today and through fruition of the UNITAR Global Water. And the second person I'd really like to acknowledge is Dr. Richard Vogt. So Dr. Richard Vogt is, I can introduce him briefly. He's done his PhD. He's a water quality expert. He's done some of the foremost research on water quality and understanding the drivers of water quality, published in high impact journals, and just done really incredible work understanding water aquatic systems and lakes in particular, and thinking about climate drivers, landscape drivers, nutrients. If you ever need a person to tell you about like all the intricacies of how aquatic ecosystems work, Richard is your guy. And you're going to be impressed with all of the knowledge he's amassed and all of the, the research that he's done to really improve our global understanding of how water quality works in lakes. And Richard joined our team working with UNITAR and York University to develop the flagship course on SDG 6, creating universal access to water. And so when you take that course, you're going to get that knowledge base that Richard's amassed over several decades working in the water field. So thank you, Richard, for all your work with the UNITAR Global Water Academy and for moderating this session, but also for just the work that you've been doing with us. And now I'm actually going to pass it over to him, and he is going to lead the rest of our discussion today.
Thanks very much, Sapna. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I'm really happy to moderate this session. This is a subject that I have a lot of interest in and that I'm very passionate about. So it's really nice to be able to talk to everybody about the diversity of careers we can have in this field and the type of impact we can make when we have the right opportunities. So one of the interesting things about if you decide to work in sustainability science or environmental studies, there are many diverse and interdisciplinary careers. So the challenge then is to think about how you fit in this global puzzle. So it can be hard to pinpoint any one specific path in this field because there are so many options that are available to you. The job market is always evolving. I'm sure that's something that our panelists will tell us about today is the things that have changed since they've been involved in their jobs and the types of changes you might expect to see in the future. So having these constantly moving targets is a challenge when you're trying to find a job. And then we have this aspect of finding careers anywhere is this balance of passion and practicality. We always talk about following your passions, but we all know that there are practical realities associated with doing that. Finding the right mix is a difficult thing to do. So a couple of the key questions that we thought about for today's panel is, how do I identify the right mix of education and skills to get to where I want to go? And I'm hoping our panelists will give us some insights into the type of skills new graduates need to succeed. And then how do I find the right types of organizations? This is a challenge too. We all know about greenwashing, and not every company has the right bona fides that meet our passions or meet our interests. So knowing where to work, knowing where to find these jobs is a challenge. And it's a real privilege today to get to speak to 3 people who have found very interesting jobs who can tell us a little bit of how they came to do what they do. Our objectives for today are we are looking at giving you a chance to understand the diverse career paths that are available to you for people who are studying science and or environmental sustainability. We want to identify the training, education, and skills that you'll need to be successful in these fields. We want to give you exposure to evolution of career paths, so seeing how people change what they do, because constant change is the reality in a modern workplace. And then we want to understand the roles that both local communities and international organizations play achieving some of our goals of sustainability. We have a really broad spectrum of speakers today who can tell us about different opportunities along this. Now, you might be wondering what qualifies me to moderate a panel on career diversity. I've had kind of an interesting path myself. So as Dr. Sharma mentioned, I studied aquatic ecology. I was interested in like phytoplankton and zooplankton, how they fit within lakes. I love doing this. I did a lot of research. I spent a lot of time looking through a microscope, and I developed a lot of skills that were very specific in sciences. I then took those skills and entered into a series of research fellowships, postdocs, and lectureships. And that allowed me to develop my communication skills, allowed me to develop my writing skills, all of these things that are necessary to be a successful scientist. Then I had the opportunity to do something completely different. I worked in a commercial art gallery for 5 years, managing operations. It might not seem like a really intuitive fit, but as it turned out, my training in science made me very well suited to running an art gallery. You know, the people at the gallery always said, the last thing we ever thought we needed was a scientist, but we're glad we have one. So it was really nice to be able to translate those skills over. While I was working there, I learned a lot about storytelling. I always hear Dr. Sharma talking about this, that as scientists, we need to learn how to tell stories. Working in the art world really let me hone that craft. The job that I'm doing now, which is working with UNITAR Global Water Academy to develop online courses. So we need to think about how to reach people. So at that time I spent learning storytelling, I think it's going to be a real advantage to what I'm doing now. So the important things here is I have 25 years of training and employment where I've had lots of different experiences. Disciplines are broad, and I'm still learning new skills. And I think that's one of the really essential things. Today, in order to get the certificates of attendance that you can all apply for, we'll have a couple of evaluation questions. And just so you can keep it in mind while we're speaking, these are the things we're asking. So first is to name 2 skills that are necessary to pursue a career in environmental sustainability. So make sure you pay attention to the specific skills that our speakers tell you about. What future trends panelists highlight with respect to their careers and their fields? Did they mention any specific skills or technologies that might be in the future? And finally, just so you can all reflect on your experience and what you've learned, what was the single most important takeaway message you learned from the panel discussion today? So please keep those top of mind while we're hearing from our speakers. And then all of you who sign up who are online and want to obtain a certificate, you'll receive an email from this UGWA@YorkU email address. We'll provide a link to the evaluation questions. And then once that's been submitted, you can have your certificates. So from here, I would like to turn things over to our panel and start with the first couple of questions I'd like everybody to respond to. Maybe we'll start with Mike. Is can you tell us a little bit about where you work, how else, and then maybe a little bit about your education, how you think to do that job?
Sure. Well, hello everyone. I'm Mike Layton. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer here at York University. That role rests in the operational side of the university, but has a lot of ties with the academic research side. In particular, it's about catalyzing and reinforcing sustainability in the work that's done by all the operational divisions, as well as supporting the work of teaching, learning, and research for the academy, and try to bridge those two things, so that we make the questions that are being answered by and being taught on the academic side relevant to the operations of the university and vice versa. That those challenging operational questions that we're facing around sustainability are offered up as living lab experiments or thought questions to our friends across the academy with expertise in that area. I came by here through first coming to York as a graduate student. I did my Master's of Environmental Studies, and partly because, and it's actually the reason why I came back 20 years later, or 15 or so years later, and that's because York was where, and the NES program in particular, was where other activists in the space of energy, water, climate action, environmental action, whatever you want to call it, in the early 2000s, they were graduates of the NES program here in York. And all the people I saw making an impact in our community, I live in Toronto, but making an impact in our community and in the conversations I was having with other people in that sort of sphere of politics and environmental action were coming from York. And I thought, you know what, this is what I want to do. I want to learn to be a better activist. and to make a difference in my community. So I came up to York. I'm not a scientist. I wasn't a scientist previously. My background was environmental management and political science, that intersection around environmental policy. But really what I wanted to do was influence that policy. So I came up to York. I studied here for 2 years. I had two good opportunities in my field come about after, one working for a small environmental not-for-profit in Toronto, working on energy and water issues, and then the other working for a large multinational consulting firm, doing work globally around community engagement and environmental decision making. I chose the former. Both are completely valid career paths, but for me, being in the community that I loved, being around my family, being able to commute with my bicycle, being able to work on issues that were near and dear to my heart was core, despite the fact that the pay was less and the advancement, and the pay was less, the employment was precarious, and the opportunity for advancement was rather minimal. After 4 years there, I working through water issues around the Great Lakes, energy issues around the Green Energy Act here in Ontario. I managed to get several accomplishments of policy change under my belt with the provincial government. At the time, I had learned a lot from a lot of great mentors, and there's sort of my little plug for the importance of finding good mentors in your whatever field that you go into. I was elected to Toronto City Council in 2010 after knocking on doors for 8 to 10 months. I think it was 10 months. I knocked on 250,000 doors or something along those lines. Some doors multiple times. I spent 12 years on Toronto City Council, where I worked on a variety of water issues. But I describe being a local city councillor in the city of Toronto. You're a mile wide in the issues that you discuss, but only an inch deep. So my expertise was minimal around the water issues, but I got to have actually a really big impact on those. So I got to advocate for things like industrial surcharge for affluent being put out by industrial polluters. I got to advocate for a stormwater charge that unfortunately council more recently decided to turn down, but I got it on the agenda, and it sounds like it's coming back because of recent flooding events in Toronto. But after 12 years of doing that, I actually made a very personal decision to step away from politics, to focus and have a little bit more time with my two girls at home, and the opportunity to join York's team came about. And so that's how I re-entered the York family to help both set very ambitious climate sustainability targets, and then help us work together as a community to solve them here on campus, and hopefully be able to have impact beyond our campuses.
Thanks very much, Mike. I neglected to give a proper introduction for everybody, so sorry about that. Thank you, Mike, for filling in the blanks for me. I'd like to introduce Diana Kapansky next, who is the head of the Freshwater and Wetlands Unit in the Ecosystems Division at the United Nations Environment Program. She works out of Nairobi, Kenya. She's previously served as the coordinator of the Global Peatlands Initiative and is an expert in landscapes and biodiversity, having worked across the African continent the past 23 years. Diana is a York University alum, and she received a Master of Environmental Studies here. So I'm hoping you'll tell us a little bit about her.
Great, thanks so much for the introduction. It's great to be here. I just want to also preface with this that I'm here on my home leave. As an employer gives an opportunity to their employees to go home every 2 years, but I also am here working because we've got also the flexibility to actually then add pieces like this, collaboration, connectors, influencing future generations into the work that we do. So I am working, but I wouldn't travel from Nairobi, Kenya to this room. I would have been on the Zoom. I just want to preface that it's so delightful to actually be here in person. Just have to work out timing. So indeed, I work for the United Nations Environment Program, and we're one of the only two of the global secretariats that are located in the Global South. So UNEP, and also being the Global South, gives us a really unique perspective because we also have a worldview. We work on issues by bringing the best policy and practice to inform, the best science and practice to inform policy decisions. But we also then work with especially developing countries, to help them tackle their environmental problems. And at the moment, we have a global triple planetary crisis that we're working on for climate change, pollution, and loss of nature, biodiversity. So I'm a graduate of York University, as you mentioned, Master's of Environmental Studies, and way back then, which was a while ago, I was one of the few scientists that were in the program, which was an amazing opportunity for me to get a broader perspective. So what I would say that whatever lane you are in, whichever specialty or program you're in, dabble a little in something that maybe is out of your comfort zone, or also is in complement to the work with your career opportunities. I think that makes me myself a unique person in space of policy setting and policy direction. Is that actually I'm a scientist, but I come to the policy space with deep understanding of ecology. I did my undergrad at Queen's University, an honors degree there, and my honors degree was actually on bird behavior. Very interesting, because I went into Queen's wanting to be a forensic scientist, but way back then there was no one teaching DNA fingerprinting. The only place that had DNA fingerprinting taught that was the bird behavior lab. So here I walk in as wanting to be a pre-med student that was going to investigate crimes and solve them using DNA fingerprinting, and I landed in the songbird behavior lab in the biology department. So that was also very interesting to really understand how we trace repairs, how we connect that to behavior, and that also then pushed me beyond my sort of very problem-solving perspective. But in my fourth year, I sort of stepped out of that and did a conservation biology course, which was a field course and a collaboration with Stanford University Biological Station. I stretched, I worked hard, I paid for the course myself because it involved going to Costa Rica for some research. And when I went to Costa Rica and I looked at butterflies as an environmental indicator, I saw the destruction and deforestation in Costa Rica way back when in the late 1994, before 1994. And this was before or just emerging Costa Rica having actually this resurgence and belief in changing their environmental view. But I then found that was a bigger problem to solve than a crime on the streets of Toronto. And that one moment actually did change my career path. And I decided then to take a little gap, do some work, and then applied for the Master's of Environmental Studies here in York. As one of the few science people, my master's was in constructed wetlands for wastewater treatment and biodiversity conservation. That was in 1999, and way ahead of the game, I think, then was cutting edge. But at that time, York didn't have an engineering faculty, so I did my engineering part of the program at U of T. So that also opened my mind and my opportunity to cross learning across universities, and also really appreciative of York's approach to cross university learning. And I think that's as a student, don't be afraid to ask. That's what I learned. You have to identify what you need to make sure that your studies are fulfilling a question or a career path that you want to undertake, and don't be afraid to ask for some flexibility or a connection outside of the university, but also across faculties. More looking broadly at interdisciplinary. I was teaching at York to practice assessment, and I also then, through my connection to University of Toronto then was hired actually as part of a consulting team that did some research on the illness cost of air pollution. We were hired by the Ontario Medical Association. We weren't working for the environmental piece. We were working for doctors because they were, at that time, back in the day, we had those smog warnings and smog events, and they were frustrated by having full waiting rooms, bounding our system with asthma attacks. They all not only saw children suffering, losing their learning opportunities, also their mental health, but also saw parents that were suffering as well, losing, employment, taking days off work to tend to their child. So we looked at a broad study about what is the impact of air quality, poor air quality, both on agricultural activity, but loss of work days, and put that together for the Ontario Medical Association to lobby if the Ministry of Environment and lobby the Transport Ministry. And once we had that science on the desk, the study on the desk, at economics and the impact on people, they made a very swift decision. And that was why people had to plug their cars into the emission testing, that single study. We did that across Canada, and then we also had that study replicated in the States. So I'd say if you have an opportunity to use your skills, if a professor or someone does reach out to you, say, would you like to be part of this team? I see you're really good at this sort of research. Stretch yourself, because this little personal stretches will also give you further opportunities in the future. So don't just stay in the lane of doing that coursework. I know it's hard, but really, if you can, try to stretch yourself a little bit to take other opportunities. That then led me to an opportunity to be placed in 3 locations around the world and doing environmental impact assessment in Egypt, Canadian government, working in Laos on protected areas, or working in Nairobi on capacity building in dryland areas. And it wasn't any of the job titles that I just had a conversation with a friend that said, I always wanted to go to Africa, right? Why are you even considering any other? And that single conversation I had with my friends, I listened to my friend, and that actually led me to be placed in the Kenyan government more than 24 years ago. I haven't left. I felt like problems that Africa, Kenya, and the world now is dealing with were more pressing and urgent than the challenges that Kenya was facing at that time. So I worked in the Kenyan government for a year, and then it was on a project with UN Development Program, and then they hired me, and I joined that team working on drylands development issues globally. And after that, I was finding the pace of development a bit too slow, so jumped into emergency humanitarian. I wanted to get impact fast and furious, and we did a lot of amazing work as part of the event. Food and Agricultural Organization Emergency Section in the Great Lakes. And then I found myself 7.5 months pregnant in Congo, and the guerrillas were coming into the town, not the actual ones, the ones that we want to see, the ones we don't want to see. I thought, this doesn't compute. So I took a little break. I got 2 kids, and then I decided that actually I would apply for a position in the UNITAR and York Program, and been doing that since 2010. It's a while, and working on science policy, but also strategic work, from creating our environmental sustainability program, which all UN agencies work with. It's an education program actually for one UN, so working as well across the UN system as a community, and to starting new initiatives on red, which is reducing emissions from deforestation and land degradation. It's forestry plays that then popped into programs on wildfires and also peatlands, and then of the freshwater inputs.
Thanks very much, Diana. So,
Long story, sorry, but I am.
go ahead.
I'll take it.
I think one of the themes that we're seeing starting to develop here are the idea of being open to new experience, being willing to take a chance on something different, but you have this solid base of a foundation of training that you can apply across different fields. So always keeping your eyes open, seeing what opportunities are there, and jumping on the moment is something worth considering. I want to introduce our final panelist, is Mr. Stephen Joyce. Stephen is a program coordinator at the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, so UNITAR, in Geneva. And there at in Geneva, he oversees and coordinates several projects associated with UNITAR, including the UNITAR Global Water Academy, of which we are a part today. And Stephen is nearing the end of his master's program in public administration. So Stephen, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about what you do and maybe how that relates to your training.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Richard. And first of all, I want to say UNITAR, thank you, Dr. Sapna Sharma, for hosting us today. This room online that have joined us today. So to go back, just giving a little bit of a brief history of what brought me here today. I grew up not too far from here in Hamilton, Ontario, not too far away. And I'll give you a little bit of a history on the place, because I think that's key in terms of discussing career trajectory. So Hamilton goes by many names. It's one of the names is known as Steel Town, based on the proletariat hub of World War II era grading steel manufacturing. It also has the other name, the armpit of Ontario, from the ecological consequences that have followed that. And additionally, also the waterfall capital of the world. More than 100 waterfalls present in the region. And I mentioned that because of the key philosophy that I think I've inherited living in this place, which is leave your backyard better than you found. And I remember growing up in a place where I saw the ecological consequences, particularly relationships in the water academy. There was lots of algae present in Lake Ontario, which just looking at this region, for those that are familiar with online, is one of the biggest lakes in the world. It's a gorgeous lake, and yet we're not able to swim. And that became, this was my backyard. I felt there must be something that can be done in the region itself to make your backyard better. So that was something that always carried until I went to a place where I think my backyard was much more beautiful, though as much as I love Ontario, to British Columbia at the University of Victoria, where I studied a master's in public administration there. And to me, this is beautiful places in Canada. Everyone to visit there if they have the opportunity. And great fresh water and also saltwater bases there to explore. Which inherited a big part of my experience as I grew up, and I inherited projects in the Water Academy. Now, through this program, I chose it very specifically because it had the value of doing 3 different co-op semesters, which was very important to me. Before this, I did a degree of philosophy, which one might ask, well, how are you going to get a job with a philosophy degree? To which I argue a lot of people end up going to law and use their critical things, which I did very much inherit before. But these co-op programs, these practicums were very valuable. They allowed me to work in the federal government, which heritage, then in the provincial government at British Columbia ombudsperson, then internationally at UNITAR, starting off as a trainee And I was very grateful that after my probationary period there, allowed me to continue on with this approach, and I started working there as a program coordinator. So on the basis of that, I want to echo something that Diana said in terms of stretching yourself. I'll say it in terms of finding comfort in the discomfort. I recognized very early at an age that I wanted to see outside of the scope that was immediately in my backyard to eventually give back to the backyard, whether that means physically moving around to a different place, which I took from Montreal to Victoria, now to Geneva and Switzerland, but also in terms of your skills, your competencies, being able to find discomfort in particular areas and sectors that you might not be as familiar with, but if the opportunities are present there, use those challenges for opportunities for yourself to gain. And so coming back then to UNITAR, I had the great pleasure there to have a bit of a dual role, which is part very grateful to work very closely with my director, Alex Pia, Division of Social Inclusion, assisting him with coordinating various different matters with the division itself, and then overseeing a lot of different programs, projects that are within UNITAR Water Academy. On the former side of that, I started this position 6 months after training. And I want to echo this point in terms of thinking about skills, but also the challenges that I felt were present at that time, and perhaps can be echoed for yourselves as you're looking for positions, which is the role of pressure. Pressure, I think, is something that I experienced when I got this position, in terms of also feeling how can I succumb to complete the accomplishments that I've set out here. And I think pressure has perhaps a negative connotation in terms of too much pressure, you might feel at burnout, too little, maybe a little bit demotivated, but the right amount when pushed and propelled to a certain degree can allow you to really stretch yourself, as Diana mentioned, to find that comfort in a discomfort place. And also, I want to echo something in relationship to that which Mike mentioned, is when you don't necessarily feel that you have the skills and competencies yourself, just first of all to trust yourself, but beyond that to trust the extension of your team. And Mike mentioned the role of mentorship, which for me has been the most valuable part, perhaps, of my career with my colleague Daniel Nazarov, and also being my director, in terms of allowing them to take me under their wing ultimately to create that career growth, to extend the skills that I had and reach certain potential. I'm not sure, but perhaps laying dormant within me. And I think just generally, not even in a professional sense, mentors that I've had in my life have been the most impactful. In this room, I see some students that are present here that are working with Dr. Sapna Sharma, and I think a better mentor for the leadership that she has and that I've seen working as a partner with her. When you are entering, at least for myself, at a very junior level, it's always going to be learning. And so if you aren't always sure of the answer, be able to reach out, extend that to other people that are your team are there to support you, there to help you, and hopefully to guide you for the mentorship role that they might have. I just want to convey very much the importance, at least for myself, and hopefully for yourselves, that you find an individual to help help guide you as your career path moves forward, and then perhaps at a certain time be a mentor yourself. Yeah, that's
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'd like to pivot now and get into some of the practical skills that people who are interested in environmental sustainability might need to find careers. So each of you maybe have one or two practical skills that you'd like to share that you think would be something that we should pursue. I'd love to hear that.
Sure, and I think you mentioned one, Richard, right off the top, communications, and just how we build that compelling point for advancing a particular policy position, an idea within an organization, the ability to communicate that point clearly, creatively, and to whichever audience you're targeting is I think incredibly important. I was part of the planning stream here at York, the MES, now EUC, but in the MES program, where they taught, they were training urban planners. Is anyone in that program? No. So amongst planners, everyone knows the distinctions between the universities, depending on what planning program you're coming from. You come from the University of Toronto or Waterloo, you've got a very technical background in reading bylaws and in angular planes and all these things to do with that touch on architecture rather than the human aspects of planning. Whereas if you come from TMU or from York University, it's a much more human-centered angle rather than the technical angle. But one skill that they don't teach in any of these programs that I wish they did, and the only reason why I got there was because then Dean Barbara Rada was teaching planning theory or something like that, and she sent us all into City of Toronto run planning meetings to say, go down and look at what a planning meeting looks like. And I went down and saw a bunch of people shouting that this LRT was being built along St. Clair, and then the presenters at the university or at the city just trying to keep the meeting under control. But it's that facilitation piece, that communications and the facilitation tool that they don't actually teach anyone. So any opportunity you get to speak in front of a group, and believe it or not, whenever those calls come out to say we need moderators for breakout tables, do it, because that skill doesn't come naturally. I come from a long line of politicians, which may be why I came in with a little bit more confidence. But when I was graduating at York, even with a graduate degree, I was not confident enough to moderate those tables. It took time and training to get there, and it's all about communications. But it's a very specific skill set that once you have that ability to stand in front of a group, make a presentation, and communicate those ideas in creative, fun ways. When you talk about storytelling, and are able to get away from just sitting there and reading the four or 5 points on a PowerPoint slide, you'll really start to feel the room and your ability to advance policy or to advance ideas, to sell things really. And I don't want that to sound wrong, but to sell ideas out there, it'll come a lot more naturally. And so you can acquire those skills. You get a little bit of it in the classroom when you're in your capstone project, when you're in your C4 project, when you're able to when you're offered those opportunities to present things. But there are a lot of other opportunities to get some hands-on experience with those skills, and a lot of places to go for resources. I know that there's a faculty member, not a faculty member, but an instructor out of UC that has published on LinkedIn just a bunch of big point form notes about how to communicate sustainability more effectively in your everyday life as well as in your work. And so looking for resources like that to help with communication skills, I think is pretty critical.
Diana, one of the things that's really interesting about your job is that you have a strong technical science base, but it's considerable leadership involved in your position. I wonder if you can speak to those skills as well. Leadership skills that are essential.
Thanks so much. And I think both of you touched on it. Being able to communicate, to be in the room, to listen, to be humble enough to accept mentorship. I think that's really, a lot of people
go through a degree, it's hard work, you did well, you aced it. You know, you got awards or you didn't get awards, but you really came through the end of it. You really feel, I'm an expert. And then the reality sets. So don't be sort of afraid to ask for help. Also be humble. I think that the new age of leaders are collaborators and also shape other people to their capabilities is really important for me as a leader. And yet, you know, you sort of need to fall into a leadership role when you are receptive to others, listen, you also hear from other and respectfully accept other people's perspectives and content. And I think that I didn't really see my route into diplomacy, but I think that having been in a degree that was multidisciplinary and also being maybe the isolated individual in the group that maybe wasn't sort of bolstered up by like-minded people allowed me to step back and be a little bit more humble and say, that's really interesting perspective. I remember one of the moments as we started to all present our master's our master's papers and programs, and we had to do that presentation, right? So we had, right, overhead projectors, so this was like a transparency, I'm telling my age again, where someone put the map of the world on the transparency, and that in those days you could mess that, right? It wasn't just a computer like was presenting and mirroring, but he put it on upside down. Everyone knows what upside down means in this room, right? There is no upside down to a map. That was the point, right? So when he put it up on upside down, map upside down, without Canada being at the north of the globe, so many people's hands shot up, right? Oh, you know, this person just know what they're doing, are they going to make a fool of themselves? Whatever the intention was of the people that shot their hands up to make that correction. Whereas a number of us just looked and really absorbed that moment. And I go back to that moment, especially working on global issues, right? Is what does the map look like and what is the true map? So I think that openness to learning, the openness to being humble and listen to other perspectives, and the willingness of sharing your knowledge openly without competition and your expertise, which you have, and communicating in a way that someone like an economist or a lawyer or a planner, an architect can understand respectfully, not conveying it in a sort of I'm going to lead a really smart individual way, but in a very helpful way, opening up. So I think for me, the leadership has definitely elements of course, you have to be confident and invest in your knowledge base. So always learning and renewing and keeping up with science. A lot of people's jobs can take them, into that space where you're pushing paper, right? Or eventually being more of that in administration. But this is where I think I feel the responsibility to the world, to future generations, to stretch, right? Because there's a lot of work to be done, and it's super urgent. So don't feel the anxiety, but take your responsibility and stretch yourselves to, if you can, and if you can, then you help leaders make the right decisions. You help people steer in the right direction, and you also can absorb knowledge from others to actually make the impact that you want to see in the world.
And it's super interesting how you can have these moments of clarity. What you want to do, where you want to go. Seeing this map upside down is something you remember. It's so inspiring. Stephen, on a day-to-day basis, what are one or two of the most important skills that you recommend?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I will say, just going back in my background here, further, but it's really in the role of critical thinking in terms of, especially when working with more senior leadership, being able to be placed in a room where you're a junior professional or senior professionals and raise questions, raise the right questions, not to say be too critical, but constructively critical in terms of steering the conversation the way the research that you feel needs to be steered appropriately. And I mentioned that not only in terms of raising the right questions, but also raising the right questions in relationship to your research. Because I noticed this with a lot of my colleagues in terms of what Mike had mentioned, in terms of confidence, to clearly, succinctly raise your message with communication. It's incredibly important. A lot of colleagues that perhaps are anxious or nervous, who are you to question your leadership? Well, you have a voice that's very important. You brought into this position for a very unique purpose into this room. And so I've always been told this from senior leadership. There's a question that you feel is something that would maybe raise eyebrows and it's a sensitive matter, then being able to have the intuition to observe those questions, all your leadership aside afterwards and say, hey, I don't think you should have done this. This is perhaps advice. I welcome you to consider this but in such a way that if you feel it would perhaps be a bit embarrassing itself, hold that aside. Second thing I wanted to say in terms of research is when I think of the skill sets that I've acquired, I don't necessarily, when I went to this role, I don't necessarily have all the answers, nor do I think I do now. But what I do think I have some sense of compass to guide me is trust in my research and analytical skills to find the answers, go out and seek it, be critical, and ultimately creative in my approach. I think this is something that is valued in this workplace. And the answers aren't always very clear. But it's at your role to find the route to the avenue to find how you obtain those answers and what's communicated advising leadership, particularly when it's related to policy decisions, are very important to translate the science or research into clear with the research and the data that goes behind these answers. This provides you a really big vehicle to safely
I can ask one final question for everybody, and I want to turn to the future. So I'm sure in the time that you've spent in your career to this point, you've seen many twists and turns. I wonder what you think about what's next, like in terms of skills, in terms of new graduates, people entering the field. What types of things should they expect? How do they prepare themselves for the challenges?
Picking on me first again. I think this it came up. Diana mentioned it earlier, and it's that interdisciplinary nature of the complexity of the problems are so intertwined now. Being able to bring that understanding, a deeper understanding of issues and how they're connected, both physical to the social, and then within different scientific disciplines. I think it's becoming a more critical being. And just as an example, in the space of in the space of waste and reducing our the amount of waste we create. That notion of circularity brings into picture a whole bunch of other expertise and understanding of an issue that one needs to have in order to actually look at what the core concerns are or solutions are for that particular area, rather than just a more traditional understanding of how do we generate investments. So like these systems-wide solutions, I think are becoming more and more the norm, and what employers, or at least what large governments and within industry, what they're looking for is those system-wide solutions rather than just up to the issue, saying, hey, taking it in isolation, finding an expert for that solution. Rather, I think they're looking for more system-wide.
Thoughts about the future and what specific skills or training people might do next?
Yeah, I definitely think I want to remind and echo that aspect of stretching yourself both in what you think you can accomplish, stretching the way that you think what you think of, which is then quite often going outside your disciplinary. I would say that one of the big pieces is you are you, right? Your backyard. Have that perspective. It's unique. Don't lose it. Keep it and share it. And wherever you come from or whatever experiences you've had, value that that's your experience and be freely share it, because that's the uniqueness of individuals is what's super important about what you've studied, how you understand it, what's your perspective in the room, then how you communicate that perspective and share more of yourself. As you know, I grew up in Hamilton Park. I spent my cottage my time at my cottage with my stay at home. These sort of things, or if you spent your time in a basketball court in your neighborhood or wherever you have your experience, because I think sharing more of you as an individual will also allow other people to understand the perspective of your learning and the perspective of your knowledge and how that can be applied. So don't lean too heavily on the emerging tools, which make everything sort of wish-wash together. Stand out, be you, share your critical thinking and your perspective, because with the growth of AI and use of tools like that, everyone's CV is looking the same, right? Everyone is looking like the same person that has the same amazing background and the same amazing perspectives and passion to bring to the job, and we all know that we are all individuals. So draw on who you are as a person, but also then hone in, because the skills that are needed are communication skills. I would say one of the most important things for me in my team is planning and organization skills. Not planning as in sitting, but actually having to plan and reflecting on setting your goals, your timelines in a stepwise manner. But not only that, holding yourself to account for those timelines and also reflecting on the process. Quite often just get to the result, oh yeah, I got that paper, I got that result, but don't reflect on the process of learning. We also don't write or document that procedure. And I think a lot of people would be stop making a lot of mistakes or trying to reinvent the wheel if we shared how the wheel, we don't share, we share it as a finalized wheel. But if we shared all the steps to make the wheel functional, I think a lot of people could also learn and we could advance transformation. So collaborative spirit, very organized, but also reflective. That are the questions, is the work that you're doing going to deliver the impact that you as an individual desire. That's quite important.
Thank you, Diana. Stephen, any thoughts on the future?
Yeah, absolutely. No, so just to maybe reiterate on one point, and then I'll mention another, which is, so if I was going to say in regards to skills particularly, if there's any one skill that I find that stands out as my position level, static, that is always valuable, is the importance of emotional intelligence. Is speaking about that unique self. Who is that unique self? Understanding yourself, most importantly, so that you can make learns in that world. Learning how to act accordingly rather than reacting to a situation, which isn't always easy when you're doing something that's very time sensitive, where you need to be in conditions of so much pressure, and learning how to work and be around. And the second part of that I wanted to mention, which is very important, is extending that concept, is know the people that you're surrounding yourself with. Be curious about them, learning about them, ultimately to be a leader, but to work as a team. I can't can think of the amount of times where someone has approached me before anything else. They ask a question, the work, particularly a job that I'm in, rather than just simply, how are you? How's your day going? What did you do yesterday, this week? Getting to know people, because it's really those interpersonal experiences that I think make team bound and work together in a collaborative nature. And we need everybody's leadership, their vision, their dedication, to create such a sustainable world. And it's particularly from the unique perspectives that we think we all have, that we can collectively make change. Outcomes such as Agenda 2030 and what is going on beyond that. To that note, I would say, think about the future. Highly invite yourself to keep your eyes and ears peeled for some of the future coming up in September. We're discussing many reforms within the UN system.
I want to thank our panel today. This was really a great chat. I'm sure everybody really learned a lot, and thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it. Thank everybody for coming as well. Sapna, do you want to say?
I think just thank you, everybody. Thank you for the panelists for sharing your wisdom. I think it was really inspiring for all of us here.